Joining us now, Courtney Breen, senior analyst at Bernstein, covering U.S. Pharma, biopharma. Courtney, great to have you with us. Obviously, there's still some questions outstanding. I'm wondering if you're, as you think about companies with U.S. manufacturing, if companies have pre-existing plants, are they also exempt?
I think what we've had so far is a tweet or a post on Truth Social rather than necessarily the discrete and detailed policy. So I think there are a lot of questions that are still outstanding, and particularly that manufacturing in America exclusion. There are questions that arise around that as we think about not each plant that perhaps is getting established in the U.S. is just for a single product. It may be for many products. If there is a plant being having ground broken on it or construction underway, does that exempt you for all of your other products and the importation tariffs for them coming in? So lots of questions still exist around kind of U.S. versus ex-U.S. manufacturing sites, what constitutes enough, as well as how much exclusion can you gain from that tariff.
One of the questions that seemed to have been unanswered but has now since been answered by the White House is that countries with trade deals with the U.S., those companies, those pharmaceuticals will in fact be exempt. And I'm wondering if you sort of think about who might be impacted. Then there are countries, obviously, without a trade agreement where they do manufacture pharmaceuticals, like in India or Switzerland. How do you think about that impact?
Yeah, it's a great question. When you look at the overall value of imports for pharmaceutical products into the U.S., there are two things to note. First, the numbers are really high. So in 2024, it was about $214 billion worth of imports into the U.S. That number is really high because of a concept of transfer pricing, where you're bringing those products in at a high price into the U.S. so that you can accumulate as much of your profit in a lower tax region like Europe. In addition, we also see that the overall industry's imports into the U.S. are highly skewed to Europe. So Europe making up about 60% of the overall pharmaceutical imports into the U.S. As we think about the 15% agreement that's already in place with Europe, that's a nice, stable kind of number that people can deal with. When you look at kind of India or China, these are high volume contributors, but they are contributors that are much more associated with lower cost ingredients, earlier stage API or earlier kind of constituents that you might incorporate into these products, rather than the finished goods where the value or the risk of tariffs being expanded is the highest.
Courtney, I suppose this was at least one overhang on the group among many, or several at least. Where else are we going to look? Are pharmaceutical investors going to be looking for answers on the policy front? We still have this notion of some kind of drug pricing push or something along those lines. So how are you thinking about how that influences business models and valuations?
Absolutely. I think drug pricing has been the number one topic in all the conversations I have with investors at the moment. Tariffs, for the largest part, had kind of been dealt with in many investors' minds, even though we hadn't had the announcement. Drug pricing, however, is kind of the primary driver of the margin multiple compression that we've seen for all of these companies. As we look to what might get announced, September 29, so Monday, is the next critical deadline. Now that we've had tariffs roll off, it is much more likely that we start getting pricing news. Why is this? Because tariffs have been the leverage that the administration has had to try and request improvements on the drug pricing scenario. And that's because on drug pricing, there are much more narrower paths that the administration can enact on the industry compared to what they could do on tariffs. So we are expecting a relatively noisy week next week. And I think it's important to know that headlines and what gets implemented often look quite different. So we're going to be kind of at the ready trying to digest anything that does get announced on Most Favored Nation or any other direct-to-consumer platforms or the Inflation Reduction Act negotiated 15 drug prices that we expect might start coming through as early as next week.